results, there's been a chorus of voices of doom around the economy now and after the lockdown. Our economy was in big trouble long before COVID-19, but the Brenthurst Foundation says South Africa now has a political choice between doubling up on government intervention or relying on the private sector. So, is it really possible to turn this crisis into opportunity? The Brenthurst Foundation's Gregg Mills joins us now for more on this. Dr. Mills, good evening to you. All right, firstly, everywhere you look it seems there's news, bad news and worse news, both in the short term and the longer term when it comes to the economy. You seem to be suggesting that this is actually going to force hard political decisions.
Yeah, I mean, there's always opportunity in crisis. There's, and this is the lesson from Asia historically, is that you use crises to push through very tough, otherwise political decisions, which relate in this case to the economy. And I think if the president wants to do so, it's probably as good a chance as he has as any. But fundamentally, South Africa is faced with a fork in the road. Do we keep going down this increasingly statist-dominated route where you see an increase in government expenditure as a proportion of the budget, increasing debt as a consequence of this, a lack of growth, or do you find an off-ramp via this crisis to be able to invent a different sort of economy? And that off-ramp has to take us onto a road that's quite different to the road that we were on before COVID. It has to take us to a road that's a higher growth, both in economic terms and in job terms. And I think it can be done. But to do that, he's going to have to make some very tough choices, and he's probably going to have to swim against the stream within his own party. And he probably now has the credibility as well as the political support to be able to do that. So I do see a silver lining in this process, but we are going to have to find an off-ramp quickly, and an off-ramp that takes us onto a different highway.
Okay, I mean, the reason that political leaders don't do this in the past and why it hasn't really happened here in the past, I mean, there were the nine sort of years that some in the ANC would say were lost, but it requires hard choices that lead to short-term pain. That means it's politically very difficult. So that means the politics needs to change quite fundamentally. The constituencies that were there before COVID-19, aren't they all still there now?
Yes, they are, but I think the crisis is really upon us in a much more graphic way than it was before COVID, so he can probably act in a bolder fashion. I mean, the problem in South Africa has always been that unity in the ANC has trumped rational steps, as it were, in the economy. So the party has always deferred to unity over any tough choices that have had to be made. But now, with the likes of COVID, with this enormous debt burden that we are about to accept, and with the negative growth rate maybe as high as 10% this year staring us in the face, I think he can afford to be bold. It's hardly going to cost him political support within the ANC because the economy is suffering so much anyway. So I think to translate this into a series of actions, however, is easier said than done, because he's going to have to go from the broad idea that you've got to make tough choices to making specific interventions on key things like SOEs, like issues around salaries in the public service. About improving competitiveness and efficiencies is going to be about where you allocate resources and which favoured constituencies get those resources. He has, I think, the political moment to be able to do that, and let's hope he can.
Okay, so if that were to happen, what then is the longer-term impact on South Africa? I mean, what do you see our growth rate potentially being over the next few years?
Well, if he can make some of these tough choices, I think we will rebound very quickly. We have to rebound quickly because we're about to absorb a great deal more debt. And to manage that, we have to grow faster to be able to pay it off. So we have to get onto a higher growth path, a growth path that not only bounces back from COVID, but that maintains a plus 4-5% growth rate over the next decade or more, to be able to make an inroad into what's probably going to be around, in effective terms, if you add the under and the unemployed together, something of around 50% unemployment after to COVID. So he's going to have to adopt and have a laser-like focus to his policies in terms of whether they assist or not in terms of creating jobs. That's probably going to be the critical lens through which any policy intervention can be measured. And by that I mean not jobs in the public sector, because the government's been quite good at doing that, but jobs in the private sector which are sustainable.
Dr. Gregg Mills, I really do appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed, from the Brenthurst Foundation.